Welcome to the Serious Leisure podcast. My name is Petya Petrova. I'm your host for today's podcast. I'm joined by our regular podcast contributors, Dr. Sam Elkington and Kat Branch. Sam is from Teesside University. He's our Serious Leisure expert. Welcome, Sam.
Hi, Petya. Hello, everybody.
Hi, Sam. Kat leads the University of the West of England Centre for Music. Welcome, Kat.
Hi, Petya.
Hi, Kat. Lovely to see you both here today, fresh and healthy. For our listeners, we often refer to the University of the West of England as UWE or UWE Bristol. So if you hear that UWE sound, you know what we're talking about. In this podcast, we share stories about our leisure pursuits, our passions, our hobbies, and our interests. We reflect on our attempts to successfully balance work and leisure time, or maybe not so successfully, depending on our stories. And we draw on insights from the vast literature on serious leisure. We are very excited to welcome today our two podcast guests. Dr. Noel Dennis is Associate Dean, Marketing and Recruitment at Teesside University. Welcome, Noel.
Good afternoon, Petya. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for the invite.
Well, thanks for making the time for us. We know that you're very busy. And talking of busy and guests that we're very welcome to have here is we have with us Tim Hughes, who is Professor of Applied Marketing here at UWE Bristol. Welcome, Tim.
Hi, Petya, and hi, everybody.
Right, so don't we have an episode for you today? Tim and Noel are both musicians, and they're here to talk to us about music and how music has claimed more and more time of their lives and more space in their lives and their kind of professional and personal development. So we have a really interesting conversation coming up today. But before we delve into Tim and Noel's serious leisure pursuit and their love of music, let us find a little bit about their professional roles.
Okay, Petya, shall I go first?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I'm, as I say, a professor in the business school here at UWE in marketing. My background is I worked in marketing for many years and in marketing management, and I then ran my own business for a few years doing consultancy. And at kind of age of about 47, I did a PhD and came to UWE as a lecturer. So I've been doing that ever since, doing quite a lot of research in the marketing side, supervising PhD students and other students, and a bit of teaching.
Thanks, Tim. I know it actually takes a lot to summarize a long professional career in a few sentences. So thank you for that. It can be hard, I know. And then we have with us Noel. Noel, would you please tell us a little bit about your role?
Of course, I'd be delighted to. So I'm currently Associate Dean, Marketing and Recruitment at Teesside University in the International Business School there. My background, like Tim's, is actually marketing as well. So my academic background is marketing. And I studied undergrad marketing and postgraduate management, and took a bit of time out after I graduated to be a musician and a bit of teaching in a primary school. And then somehow ended up as a part-time lecturer in Teesside University Business School, as it was then, and built a career up to principal lecturer, left for a little bit, worked as Associate Dean in Glasgow and in York, and then missed Teesside so much that I came back to the business school, and I'm delighted to be doing what I'm doing now. But I've managed to fuse my passion for jazz with management education, which you'll hear a little bit about later on.
Thank you. And it's actually quite interesting how both of you, I'm doing lots of spoilers for our listeners, how both of you have managed to integrate your personal and professional interests, and also how similar their stories are. And indeed, when we were preparing for this podcast, we realized that you know each other. So it is a small world in so many ways.
Met at conferences in the past.
We certainly did. And the memorable, I think we first met in Aston in 2003 when it was my first ever publication.
Right.
That's where we met. Yeah. That was a great conference.
It was. Yeah.
Academically and socially.
Yes, it was. I agree. Obviously leading you down dangerous ways socially.
It certainly did.
I'm smiling here and thinking, oh, do you remember the times when there were actually in-person conferences? I will not tell my listeners about my favorite conference, which was in Croatia, in Dubrovnik. I shall just leave that hanging there. Anyway, we're not here to talk about conferences, and we're not here to talk about your personal roles. We are here to talk about your love of music. So, as well as being an associate dean at Teesside, Noel is also a trumpet player. And as well as being a professor at UWE Bristol, Tim is also an acoustic guitarist. So let us start at the beginning. Would you please, both of you, tell us about where your music journey started and where we currently find you? Noel, can we start with you, please?
Of course, thank you. I'd be delighted. Yes, so I was born into a musical family. So my grandfather was a saxophone player. He played in the dance bands in the 40s and 50s in the local area, and my dad was a drummer, but he started off playing in a cornet in brass bands. So I was given my first trumpet when I was 7, and I just fell in love with it, really. My dad taught me, and it was when I was about 9 he introduced me to Miles Davis, the trumpet player, and that's when I first heard jazz, and I was fascinated by the sounds. And since that moment, really, I started to really get into music. My dad ran a really successful youth band, which I served my time in, really, in the trumpet section there, and I learned a lot from being in the band. But it wasn't until I was sort of 17 that I started to really take jazz improvisation on the trumpet seriously, and I managed to hook up with an amazing trumpet player who is still teaching me now, actually, and one of my favourite players, a guy called Gerard Presenza, and I heard him play at a conference at the Royal Northern College of Music in 1995, and I was just stunned that somebody could play the trumpet like that, and that inspired me to take a more formal learning journey into learning to improvise rather than just listening and transcribing by ear, which I've been doing to that point. And that's when I got hooked, and that's when I started to gig, I set up my band, and the rest is history, as they say.
Thanks, Noel. We'll talk about this history in more depth in a moment. Tim, how about you?
This is where I guess my journey is very different from Noel's, because 10 years ago, I certainly wouldn't have counted myself as a musician. So I've always loved blues music, particularly since I was young, and always going out to see people play. But it was only really about 8 or 9 years ago that I started to learn myself. I think I had tried to play guitar about 20 or 25, 30 years ago and kind of given up. But then I came back to it about 8 years ago and really kind of fell in love with it, and was been pretty dedicated to it, and it's become a really big part of my life. I play fingerstyle guitar and also slide guitar, so I have different guitars for different styles, and very much into the acoustic kind of folk blues music. And about 5 years ago, after having done it for 3 or 4 years, I actually made the step of playing in front of people, which I think is always a big step in music and very, very scary. So I kind of turned up at a folk club, and I didn't know whether they'd let me play blues at a folk club, but they were very welcoming, and I was probably pretty awful. But that got me off in terms of playing in front of other people. The nice thing about folk clubs is that everybody tends to go there to play themselves, so they understand the challenges of it. So yeah, since then it's really taken off, and I play every day. It's a bit of an addiction, really, and it's, I guess, the most important thing in my life now, because I've, in the last couple of years, I've semi-retired and gone down to 2 days a week at work, and so this is really the main focus of what I do, and I've got lots of plans to do more, which maybe we'll cover in the future.
Thank you, Tim. May I talk to you about that turning point, about I tried something, I gave it up, I was really interested, and then suddenly I decided to commit to it. Can I just find a bit more about that process and what was in the environment and what was happening inside you, inside your head at the time?
Yeah, I think probably when I tried it, had quite a few lessons actually in the 90s. I think I had a lot more going on. I was probably doing my PhD at the time, and obviously, quite busy with work and various things. So I think there were perhaps other priorities. I think the other thing is that the availability of things like lessons online has completely changed since then. And the ability to actually learn things online has really made it much more easy to do it in many ways. And I think the other bit was, my life circumstances had changed. And so, my children had left home and had more available space to really focus on this.
So I get the life transition to children leaving home. Well, notionally, I get that. Somebody who doesn't have children. What I'm interested in, you're talking about online learning. So were you teaching yourself using online materials, or were you doing online classes with people?
Well, I suppose it was online teaching myself, but you can, for example, I joined up, there's an American a blues person who does video lessons. So you're not actually doing lessons with him, but he posts video lessons and you subscribe to that. So I subscribed to that and learned quite a lot through that. Interestingly, recently, during COVID, I've got a friend, Michael Roach, who's an American acoustic blues player. He actually lives in Cheltenham now, but he had some time and he offered me online lessons. And so this was learning from somebody who'd learned from some of the older blues players. We did those over Zoom, which was, and that worked very, very well.
Tim, when I'm sort of listening to the progress that you've made when you came back to guitaring, it's still really notable to me that actually you've had this sort of inner motivation. You can imagine at Centre for Music at UWE, I see a lot of students who are really keen to learn and they've got those resources. And because we're there as a service, they've even got an instrument. And as we know, being an undergraduate, they've got quite a lot more time on their hands than we have. But there's still not quite the motivation and discipline. Where has that come from for you at this point, do you think, to make use of those resources, but in a way that you actually are making forward motion from what you've described, rather than just noodling around the same riffs? Because certainly when I play guitar is not my first study. I just noodle around the same riffs. And I occasionally, I might watch an online video and pretend I'm going to push myself, but actually I tend to do that on my other instruments. So what's happening for you there with that motivational push?
I think I'm very driven to be successful in whatever I actually choose to do. So once I've chosen to do something, I mean, for example, I left the comfort of working for marketing companies to set up my own consultancy, which was successful for 8 years. I did a PhD because I decided to do that, which was very much a different thing to do at the age, 47 when I was doing that. So once I've decided to do something and I'm very keen to do it, I kind of make sure I succeed in it. I think perhaps that's a matter of experience and, what works, but also just enthusiasm. I don't find it hard to pick up a guitar. I find it hard not to pick up a guitar.
Yeah, I was really interested in, you use the language of, addiction, which unless you're a very particular type of student, I don't know that the word addiction applies to the experience of doing a PhD, unless anyone would like to contradict me. And also in the same way, being excellent at your job or running your own business, these are really like tangible, clear things that have income attached to them and other types of success measures. But learning to play the guitar feels a lot more open-ended in terms of where you're going with that. So do you have very set goals in mind then with this, motivation and determination to be amazing, or actually has something else entered your thinking in that experience so that you have a softer grip on what you're aiming to do? What's happening?
I'm afraid I do have rather set goals, probably not good really, but that's just the way I am. So, having started off doing this, and one of the things that I've done is I've developed a show called 120 Years of the Blues, which is a combination of playing and talking about the history of the blues. And Michael Roach helped me develop that because he's got vast knowledge. And, so I've developed that. I did it at Nailsworth Festival last summer, and then I did another festival, Shurston Festival, in the autumn. I'm communicating with various local festivals to do that in the next year. And I've got very plain views. I want to do it, perhaps 6 or 7 times in the next year. So, I do have these kind of targets I go for, rightly or wrongly. That's the kind of way I operate. I have to kind of achieve things,
Thanks, Tim. That's very interesting. And I think before people like me listen to you and start kicking myself for not being as successful at both my career and my hobby, it may be worth just encouraging people to say you have currently moved to a part-time role at you, so you are using that spare capacity of time to grow your music interests. I know some of our listeners, and I know what you're like, so just take it easy. There is more time. Thank you for that, Tim. No, we talked about Tim's almost growth spurts in his guitar learning and becoming a musician and playing at festivals. You obviously have a longer career with music, but where you feel your biggest and most important growth spurs were?
The milestone moments were that first Miles Davis album that I heard, and then a couple of years after that, my dad made me listen to an album by Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers. Now, Art Blakey was his favourite drummer, and he made me listen to a particular track on this album called Skylark, and there's a wonderful trumpet player called Freddie Hubbard on there, and I heard Freddie's sound on this particular track, and again I think that stepped me up. I'd be about 11 then, and that I thought I want to sound like that, so I started listening to lots of Freddie Hubbard, and he's got a very, very distinct, very dark sound. His trumpet playing almost sounded flugelhorn-esque. It's like a really difficult sound to describe, but it's just one that I had in my head. And so that was a milestone moment. And then I guess meeting Gerard in 1995 was the moment that I realized that I'd gone as far as I could and I needed some help. So I'd been improvising, but I didn't really know the rules behind it, because believe it or not, jazz is not completely made up. There are rules to it. You have to learn a language. Now, my trumpet teacher, Gerard, at the time, when I actually got up and improvised over a blues in F at the Royal Northern. And I didn't know what I was doing, but he said at the end, he said 2 things to me. He said, "You've got great time and you've got a good ear." He said, "So I'd like to teach you." And so it was a year after that I started going to London on the train as an 18-year-old every month to Gerard's house to have lessons. And that's when I kind of learned, so I learned about the 2-5-1 progression, and he learned about licks, and I'm developing some technical capability and understanding how the standard repertoire, so in jazz, a lot of the music we play is called jazz standards. So these tunes were written for entertainment purposes, in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and they're still played today. And every time you play one, you find something new in it. But I learned the mechanics of how they worked and how you learned them and internalized them. And I'm still doing it now. I think the thing is, you never, ever stop learning. You're only as good as your last gig, as my dad would say, as he would have said. He's not here now, unfortunately. But that's the sort of mantra I take. And I'll be honest with you, the gigs have been very limited the past 2 years because of the situation. But I've managed to do some nice gigs, a handful of them. And I'm at the stage now where I think I need to pick up the trumpet a bit more and have some more lessons with Gerard just to push myself on. So that's the thing that that's my next sort of piece, and I'm going to be having lessons online with Gerard, who's in Copenhagen from next month. So let's see where I go next.
It's fascinating. I think we're at a stage now where I want to ask the question, so what's the hook for both of you? So what is it about doing what you do and how you do it that makes you want to set those goals or seek out those opportunities and continuously look for new ways of stretching yourself? Noel, we'll come to you first. So what's the hook? Experientially, what is it all about for you? For
me, Sam, I look at being a musician and I feel very privileged to be able to do it. And I know I've had an advantage because I was brought up into a musical family. That certainly helped me. But I just couldn't be without it, Sam, the trumpet. Do you know what I mean? It's always out of its case. Even if I don't play it every day, the trumpet is out. I'm thinking mentally about music. I think in music, I think in patterns. And that informs my day job as an academic. So I look at my discipline of marketing and leadership and how I operate and behave. I approach it as an improviser, So I think the hook is the music, it's jazz, it's improvisation. And I want to develop musically, but also I want to develop my academic work as well in the space of the jazz metaphor and take that in different directions. So I can't do one without the other, so I need to, my D-Prof, my professional doctorate, which I completed 3 years ago, was writing up all of my professional publications, but also it took into account my learner journey, if you like, as an improviser. And I learned much more about myself as a jazz improviser through that process of reflection than I've probably done in any part of my life up to that point. And that has hooked me to develop even further. It's identified some of my weaknesses that I want to address, but also it's given me opportunities to think, right, okay, I can develop more as an improviser musically. I can explore different projects. So I've got some ideas that I want to be doing this year with sort of an atmospheric trio, so sort of atmospheric sort of trumpet playing. But also, as I said, I want to develop a toolkit for businesses that can sort of help them and the individuals within their organizations develop improvisatory skills as well to make a difference to their organization. So I don't know whether that answers your question, Sam, but it's the trumpet that is always and always will be the hook.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I know you, mate. We've had many conversations about, the applications of that and what it means for all various different walks of life. But I mean, what I'm hearing in that is it's just an outlook. It's a worldview for you. It's not something you can separate from yourself. It's how you think about the world. And I think that's a really interesting. I think we probably have about 3 or 4 podcasts on that one. But so I think that's really, really interesting. Tim, is it similar for you as well, or is there something different in that for you?
Well, I think the hook is just I love playing, and when it's good. I think just thinking about it, the other thing I'd add is how much it's kind of changed my social life, because I've got to know a load of people who play music who I would never have got to know otherwise. So from the folk club, for example, I live near Stroud, and I've got to whole load of new people I've known there. In Nailsworth, where I live, I've got to know local musicians, and that, funny enough, that quite happened through COVID and trying to set up various Zoom things. But then we ended up meeting up in people's gardens and playing a bit. And through a blues week that is held, Michael Roach organises at Hartbury. Again, I've got to know a whole load of people who have a similar interest. So it's got a kind of social element as well to what I do.
Yeah, I think I hear that in what Noel's saying as well. There's certainly something about kind of that social world of the musician, isn't there?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, Noel, growing up literally in that social world. Tim, you discovering that social world.
Yeah.
And, as part of that hook you were just talking about there, it's the attachment to that. And also what I'm hearing as well, I mean, Noel's explicitly said this, but you've also mentioned it yourself as well, in that, the learning that goes on, so the sharing of practice and the talking of, and even the offers to do that kind of informal teaching, that's all part and parcel. And we see this in all of, in fact, the serious leisure pursuits that we've talked about on the podcast. They're anchored in a distinctive social world with its own kind of normative ways of behaving. And, and again, but the thing about being a musician, it's more nuanced, isn't it? We've got two very different instruments here. There's similarities, but in those social worlds, there's still that nuance. And I find that fascinating. Sorry, Kat, you want to come in?
Yeah, I was just interested in when Tim, when you brought up social worlds, because I think music social worlds can be subject to some very interesting dynamics. And certainly in some jazz circles that I've moved in, they can be quite sharky waters to navigate, if I could say. Noel, did you want to dive in there?
Yeah, I was going to say that it's very interesting. So one of the things I agree about the social aspect of being a musician. It provides a real rich social life, and many of my musician colleagues are actually my closest friends, and it's great. It's great walking into a room with trumpet players, and the first thing you start talking, what mouthpiece are you using? So these sorts of dull to the outside world probably sound really dull, but that's a big part of learning for me. So I was really lucky, as Sam said, growing up in a musical family. But before I even picked up the trumpet, my dad would gig 6 nights a week. And he would play the social clubs in Middlesbrough, where you would go and he would be back in live entertainment. So when that music was live and people were going out to watch things, but setting up the drums, meeting these interesting characters in the social club, I learned a lot about sort of how to interact with people from different backgrounds at a really early age. And that was music that brought me that. But also working with musicians that were much older than me and hearing their stories that they had to tell. Again, that's a massive piece of work to make you understand how music works holistically. So it's one thing being able to blow the trumpet and play a tune, but it's actually the understanding the cultural norms and what goes on the bandstand, and what happened in 1976 when we did this gig on a Saturday night and the drummer did all fascinating, rich stories. But I remember, I came through a big band called The Voice of the North when I was 16. And I was the youngest member in there. It was all sort of older sort of experienced musicians. I remember feeling quite intimidated in the trumpet section, trumpet 4, not really knowing what I was doing. But I was supported, and I learned so much from that experience. But listening to those guys talk in the breaks about the gigs they've done, it just inspired me to play even more. And I'll never forget the time when a trumpet player turned around to me. I was 16, he bought me a pint of Guinness. He said, "You shouldn't be drinking this." He said, "You're so young, you smell of sweets." But take it anyway. But again, it was just, I look back on that time and say I was so lucky to be able to spend time with those musicians to learn about, what they did and how they survived. Because the musical landscape has changed dramatically. In the 70s, 80s, my dad was gigging, earning a fortune gigging. Those gigs have dried up now, a lot of them, back in live turns and things. And, the pay has not really gone up to what it was in the 80s. It's a shame that's happened. It's the same with sort of the session work that used to be a massive sort of industry. Things have changed, but, I learned so much and continue to do so when I do interact with musicians. It's a great thing.
Thanks so much, Noel. I've actually loved just picturing you there as a 16-year-old with, with these older, more experienced musicians. And, I just get such a warm and fuzzy feeling, actually, that was nice and that it wasn't a place where that intimidating feeling you arrived with carried on. I think that's fantastic. Tim, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, just to say, I think mine is a very different social world than Noel's, because whereas Noel's is professional musicians, the vast majority of the people that I interact with musically, although some of them are semi-professional or have made their living out of music, the vast majority are like me. And it's amazing how many, the difference is they've probably played for most of their life. They may have played for 30 or 40 years, and I haven't. But there's a vast number of very, very good amateur musicians around, and a whole community of those. Maybe I'm lucky in the area that I live in, that there's a lot in my area.
Do you think, Tim, there's a particular flavour to that kind of amateur musician sense of camaraderie, that sense of that shared passion, doing it just for the love of it? Do you think that's a defining feature of the social world?
Definitely. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's very difficult, as Noel says, it's very difficult to make money out of music as a career unless you're, highly successful. And so it's purely enthusiasm that people we love what we're doing.
I would completely agree with that, Tim. Music, well, certainly being a jazz musician, it's not a lucrative career, and I know a lot of people who are into it for the love, but in order to survive, they do other things like teaching. And I remember the gentleman who was involved in that big band who set it up saying to me, look, he said, why don't you have the best of both worlds? He said, get a proper job and still enjoy playing your trumpet and do the two. So I'm kind of a semi-professional musician in that sense, and always have been. I've just been really lucky that I've been able to fuse it into the day job. But he also said an interesting quote to me as well. He could be the best trumpet player in the world and be penniless, best jazz trumpet player in the world. And it's right, it's the jazz scene in the UK is thriving in parts, but there are some challenges around it. It has diminished. I think the past 10 years have been challenging with arts funding sort of not being as ubiquitous as it once was. And I know I'm involved at the moment as an independent panel member of a review of jazz in the UK to look at what's happening, what we can do to sort of boost its prominence again. But I would agree with that. I don't think you go into music purely for the music. I think the love of it has got to be there, because it's one of those things you've got to want to do it all the time. You've got to live and breathe it. And I think that you don't need to be a professional to do that. You can be an amazing musician and not be in the professional circuit. So I would completely support what you said there, Tim.
Thanks, Noel. I was interested in your comments about the love of it. And I was also very intrigued by Tim's mention earlier around the fact that I loved it when it's good, or you don't love it when it's not good. And I was very intrigued by that as somebody who is moving from a kind of a hobbies, taking classes pursuits to going on stage with my improv theatre. And starting to have some really bad rehearsals. Luckily, the shows have been okay, but the rehearsals are starting to feel like, I don't know what I'm doing. This is just not happening. And I just really wanted to unpack that with you, because there's a story to be told about that early, we talked about spurt of growth, and then you're becoming more expert in your music playing. But just unpack for me, please, what that thing about love it when it's good and don't love it when it's not good, please.
Well, I think you're never quite, certainly I'm never quite sure that it is good, and you need kind of reassurance a lot of the time. But I'll give you an example. Last night, I also play in a duo with a harmonica player. And last night we played actually at Folk Club. And I think we played 4 numbers, and we don't get a lot of chance to rehearse together. And the last number wasn't very good. It just fell apart a bit. We managed to pull it once you're in front of people, you pull it together. You don't stop, and you carry on. But I felt really bad about that, But I just have to accept that that's what it's going to be like. It's not going to be perfect all the time. You aspire to being perfect, but often you think it's not very good, but people don't even notice, amazingly. So that's what I'm saying. It's like anything. It's got ups and downs.
Yeah, I'd take a little bit of a different view on that one. So in jazz, mistakes, if the wheels aren't falling off, you're not trying hard enough. That's what my great friend and co sort of worker who works with me on the jazz workshops, a guy called Pete Churchill, an amazing musician, piano player, jazz musician, musical educator. And we talk about that. In jazz, there are no recriminations for mistakes, because of that whole nature of the supportive nature of a jazz group. If someone's struggling, if I'm struggling, I know that the piano player or the bass player is going to hear what I'm struggling and give me a little bit of a lifeline out. So it's when I'm improvising, I do try things and they don't come off. And I used to feel bad about that if I'd split a note or if I'd played a wrong note over the change. But now I kind of look at ways of trying to recover from that to make it sound as if it was right. So if I play a wrong note, I'll play it for a bit longer just to say that I'm going outside of it. So in the powers of recovery comes discovery in improvisation, and that's what I do. I always do a post-mortem on the gig afterwards and think, I shouldn't have, was too fast or went on too long there. But I try not to look at mistakes as dreadful things. And I agree with you, Tim. Often the audience won't notice. You think you've had a really bad gig and someone comes up to you and goes, that was amazing, that you sounded great. Yeah, I think it's sometimes how we feel about ourselves when we're in that sort of situation. If you go to a gig and you're not feeling brilliant, you can sometimes go in with a mindset that I'm not going to play very well tonight, and I didn't play very well tonight. In actual fact, you can sometimes go and thinking I'm going to play great tonight, and you don't get any compliments at the end of the gig. It's often when you think you played bad that people will come and say you sounded great. That's what I've found anyway.
Noel, it's so interesting when you were talking about the connections with your other jazz musicians and how if it's not going too well in the moment, knowing that they'll step in for you. Because at Centre for Music, we have a jazz ensemble, which we have been trying to help those young people develop that same culture. And it's just been honestly moving to see some of the most introvert and quiet students who find risk-taking very, very difficult and are very intimidated by failure and feel that a small failure must be them as a failing as a person, rather than failing in that moment. I have learned to differentiate between these two experiences and to take those risks that you're talking about, because they know their backs are covered by these other musicians, because I think when you play together, there is this special connection process that goes on, isn't there? It's
Absolutely
unique. As a musician, clearly I am biased, but I think, there is a very particular type of connection, which is well beyond language, that happens when you're making music together.
I would agree. Yeah, it is absolutely. Yeah, it's that. It's the non-vocal, isn't it? And sort of this shared understanding of what's going to happen next, and what if this happens, how to deal with it. And it's not something you sit down post gig. It's not like being an airline pilot where you do prepare you prepare for the worst and hope for the best before every flight. You discuss every potential scenario and what could go wrong. In music, you don't talk about it, but you have in your mind, yes, if this goes wrong, this will happen. But it's never talked about, is it? And no one really teaches it. It's only experience. It's only actually doing it and making the mistakes. I found I learned a lot about playing by actually being in the youth band, as I said, but also being on the bandstand, and trying things out with those more experienced musicians who will say, don't worry about it, just keep going.
Just keep going. That's right. And then you've got that safe space to fail, where no one's judging you and no one's doing you down. Sam, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, there's so many things I want to comment on, but I'm not a musician, to just put it out there, but I do love music, and pretty much all music actually. And I am from a musical family. And I'm enjoying listening to the different journeys and the different perspectives. But what I'm hearing as well is this idea, because we've spoken a lot on the podcast about this whole idea of mastery, or self-development through our leisure pursuits. And obviously, I think for both of you, we're certainly, when we're talking about being a musician in the context of serious leisure, there's this relationship with the amateur and professional realms and domains. And I think you both obviously straddle both of those. And, it's a grey area for a lot of musicians, actually. But I was interested in listening to both of you talking there and actually thinking, well, yeah, okay, Tim's been on a more recent journey of self-development in terms of mastering that particular instrument. And Noel, you're at a different place, maybe, in terms of, actually, well, you both talked about similar things, but mastery being more kind of relative to, well, now you're talking about, well, how do I not make a mistake on purpose, but how do I really put it out there in terms of stretching yourself and challenging yourself, and not necessarily playing not to making a mistake? looking for that perfection. And I just wondered, whether you could comment on that, this idea, because in all of the stories that we've heard, there is that need for perseverance. You at the end of the day, you didn't put it down the first time you made a mistake. You carried on, but also that significant personal effort is something that is, and in the context of the framework, serious leisure framework we're talking about here, serious leisure career, you can see that career type involvement in both of your stories and journeys, in terms of, well, there's going to be peaks and troughs and there's going to be right and left turns, but ultimately it's going to involve a significant amount of effort to continue to develop. But it's all relative as well, because Noel, you're talking about, well, I'm trying something new, or I'm trying to hide the mistakes I'm making, but I'm trying to make a mistake here just to see where I can take it. And then Tim, your point around, I like this whole idea of exploring this idea of what it means to play well, because you've both got a very different perspective on that. So I just wondered, Tim, do you want to come in there first, and then Noel, you can follow on?
Yeah, I think one of the differences, Noel is playing with professional musicians, and he's playing jazz, whereas, as you say, so he's a lot further on in many ways than I am. So, for me, the question of, as soon as you play live and as soon as you get in front of other people, you will make mistakes, and you've got to just live with that. It won't be perfect. Everyone says, you can get it perfect in your own room, but as soon as you go out and do it in real life, it all kind of threatens to fall apart. And that's all the pressures of being in front of people. And so I think, you shouldn't be too much of a perfectionist, and you should just, accept that's part of the process. And, you probably, you remember the mistakes you make, and you forget the 90% that is right. So I think, it's part and parcel of it. And when you see people who play something at the end, oh, I'm sorry, I got that wrong. Well, that's a big mistake, because most people won't have even noticed. So never apologize.
Yeah, it's interesting, Sam. So the next thing for me, as I said, I'd like to do something a bit different, but where I'm at in my career now? When you're younger, starting out, when I was sort of 18, all I wanted to do was to play fast and furious and high and loud. And as I've got a bit older, I realise now that I don't need to do that. You can inspire and impress people more by playing very little. And so I'm kind of really into sound now, and this atmospheric thing. I don't want to play fast bebop. I want to be known more of some of my favorite trumpet players that I take inspiration from, the likes of a German trumpet player called Till Bronner, who has just a unique sound. He uses a lot of the mute, and I kind of want to just find that sort of place now. 15 years ago, it'd be how fast can you do it, and that actually, whilst I'll still do that sometimes, that's not what I want to achieve now. I want to achieve sort of a different sound, so that I've gone from the formula of learning to improvise. You first imitate, then you assimilate. I feel like I'll always do a bit of imitation. I'll always do a bit of assimilation, but I think I want to innovate now, but I want to innovate and do my own thing that maybe someone might look at and say, well, that's a bit bland, or it's not adventurous and exciting, but I want to explore playing the trumpet more softly, more low, and just produce really nice sounding melodies. That's my thing at the moment. That might change, of course, because you do change as you listen to things and as you watch things, but that's where I am at this moment in time. Sort of just change direction a little bit and calm down.
Thanks, Noel. Just listening to you talking about improvisation in the context of music, and thinking about my experience of improvisation in the context of theatre is really, really insightful. Because I'm not a musician, I'm as far as away from being a musician as a human being can be, really. But of course, in improv theatre, there is or at least there's the idea of happy fail. So you celebrate failure, and actually you identify the mistake, and you zoom on the mistake. And sometimes that becomes the biggest laugh and the biggest gag in the middle of the performance. But I was also struck about your description of when you were young, you were kind of fast and possibly forceful and loud. And as your expertise developed, that's mellowed a little bit. And I think that's also my reflection of being just learning to improvise. And you go in and you try to speak with 100 minutes, 100 words a minute, and not take your pause, and then speak over your partner. And as you mature, you realize that actually the deeper scenes, the more meaningful scenes, are the scenes where you take your time, you create the atmosphere, there's the kind of the scene around you, you take your dramatic pauses. And you just settle down in that kind of slowness and in that quietness that is very uncomfortable for somebody who is brand new on a stage. Fascinating. Kat.
Is that something about where what we're doing, in this case music, is then less about what we're trying to prove about ourselves and more about what we're trying to express, and also possibly enjoy? Not that playing flashily isn't enjoyable, but we just use, that's the emphatic change, isn't it? Where we're not trying to show what we can do, but actually communicate something to somebody else instead, and just sort of relax into it.
I would agree. I would if I just come in on that one. Actually, it's Miles Davis used to say, didn't he? It's the notes that you don't play that have the most impact. And it's
right.
I think it's having a confidence. Not certainly. I found when I was just starting out to improvise, I felt like I had to fill every single gap. But actually, it's sometimes nice just to play a phrase, leave a bit, let someone else play behind and do it. And I think that for me, it takes confidence to be able to not to over express yourself. That's what I think.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think can I just slightly switch tack, because I know we haven't got a lot of time left. Going back a little while, we were talking about motivations for doing this kind of thing. Now, just to be music nerdy for a moment, for any of our listeners who don't know, of the different things one could do to get dopamine going in the brain, you could exercise, like Sam. I'm sure he could offer us good advice there. There are other different activities you could do, but making music is up there, for the dopamine levels. I just wanted to ask you both, with Noel and your lifelong journey, and then Tim coming back around, having tried to dipped in and then dipped out again and come back later in life. To what extent for both of you, is there just an innate brain level chemical enjoyment about what you're doing, or is it really fundamentally about the journey? Because we've heard so much about the learning and the developing and the you've never finished learning stuff. Is there still a sense of innate enjoyment that brings you to the instrument?
Absolutely. As I said, I just love the trumpet. It's always been there, and just playing it just earlier on when I was before this, I felt better. Sometimes I can feel a little bit down, and I might wonder why I'm feeling like that. And I might realize that, actually, I haven't picked up the trumpet for a few days because I've been busy, and it's subconscious that, and I always feel better when I have. And you cannot beat that feeling. You cannot beat that feeling when you do a gig, a live gig, and you're with your band. The last one I did was for the Scarborough Jazz Festival, and it was with some amazing musicians. And the feeling was just amazing, and it lasts for days afterwards. It's like a positive hangover, if there's a term that we can. You finish the gig, and then I come home and I can't go to sleep. I have to sit over and watch TV with a glass of red or something. But then for days after, I will just feel it. It'll be a point of conversation. It's just a feeling I can't describe. And again, it comes back to me saying earlier on, I feel very privileged to be able to do what I do. But I'm still nowhere near where I need to be, and I probably never will be, but I'm going to continue to enjoy the journey.
Thank you, Noel. Tim, did you want to?
Yeah, it was very interesting what you were saying about dopamine, because I'd never really thought about this. But, I think I said it was addictive earlier. And, for me, I just have to go and play guitar. I feel if I don't go and do that sometimes, I kind of something missing. So it is addictive. A couple of other things occurred to me while we were talking, which we haven't talked about, was the kind of creative element, because what I've done over the last few years has been writing songs and performing my own songs as well, which aren't all blues by any means, but I just saw other people doing that. And I thought, I wonder if I can do that as well. And I've now got about a dozen songs that I regularly perform. And indeed, I'm looking to record them. And so the latest thing I'm doing, again, it's taking up a lot of time. I'm learning to use online kit to start to learn to record. So I'm using something called Cakewalk at the moment, and it's proving very challenging to learn. But again,
I know that system, Tim. Well done to you.
Yeah, well, I'm still struggling with it, but it's very fascinating. And so I'm trying to put bass guitar and program drums and do harmonica as well as my singing and guitar playing, and it's really interesting. So there's that creative element which I find is very satisfying as well.
There's a big intake of breath here with everybody, because we are coming to the end of this podcast, and I think everybody feels that there's so much more to talk about. We didn't talk about fully. There was a mention about how Tim and Noel themselves integrate their professional interests and professional activities with their personal activities. And we haven't unpacked the comment on creativity. There's just so much more to unpack. I'll just ask you to tell me where the day job and the hobby overlap for you, and how you have found out and kind of build on those synergies before we draw today's episode to a close. Tim?
I think I do see it as I do less academic job, then the music side increases. But I find it very interesting to reflect on what I'm doing and how it contributes to my happiness. And I actually wrote an article for Marketing Theory about happiness and co-creation of value. Co-creation of value is a marketing idea, but it struck me that it could be actually extended to the idea of happiness co-created with other people, because certainly I don't do my musical stuff in a vacuum. It requires other people to do it with, or other people as audience, and so that really set me off thinking of things that I could actually look at from a marketing point of view. And I suppose the other aspect of that is taking my kind of presentation skills and combining them with my music in this show that I put together, which is a bit different. You know, it's a bit of presentation and a bit of musicianship. So I'm trying to combine those skills.
It all started in 2003, the year I met Tim, when I wrote an article for a conference, the conference that Tim and I went to, Jazz and Strategic Marketing Planning. It was introducing the jazz metaphor into strategic marketing planning. And basically, my argument was you create a good plan, but you should treat it like a lead sheet, a musical score that can be embellished and deviated from as and when necessary. And I developed a little continuum called the Jazzer and the Reader. The Jazzer is an organization that takes an improvisatory approach to their implementation of a strategic plan, and a reader just sticks rigidly to the score regardless of what's happening in the environment. So I've published other articles since that, and I have a practical workshop which I deliver with Pete Churchill, where we go into organizations and we explore the mechanics of how a jazz group works, how improvisation works, and we involve people in the process, getting people outside the comfort zones. And again, it all leads to leadership and management. It's gone beyond marketing now, if I'm honest. So it's something that it fascinates people, which is great. When I go and do a workshop, people go, "I never thought of that, and I never thought about that." And how do I develop as an improviser? And we tie it into organizational culture. That idea of we were talking about earlier, Kat, weren't we, about that supportive community that you have in a jazz group. The rhythm section, piano, bass, drums, guitar, are like a competent management board in an organization. They play a supportive role, with the drummer playing the CEO role. And if you get a really busy drummer that gets in the way, that's akin to micromanagement in an organizational context. So we pull out all of these little parallels, and it's just great. At the end of the day, I'm stood with that hook, Sam, as we talked about. I'm stood talking about marketing and leadership, but the hook is in my hand, the trumpet. And that hook has been there since I was 7. And hopefully it'll be there for a long time to go to.
And I must say that it certainly enlivens a marketing conference to have Noel blowing on his trumpet in sessions.
I can personally vouch for that, having witnessed said scenario. I think we need another podcast, don't we? Really, we need another one of these. We need part 2. We just don't have enough time. But I like, in terms of just closing things down here, just what you've been saying there. I love the idea of co-creation of value as a metaphor, kind of musically, but also as a metaphor for happiness, and how, particularly in the context of what we've been enduring these last few years, the whole idea of co-creating value, I think, has taken on new meaning. But also the idea of improv, a metaphor for a different an alternative work ethic, maybe something like that, and I see it and hear it. And Tim, you've obviously, you've got that kind of part-time kind of mentality in terms of, well, I only have to do work for a certain, and then this is kind of defining my time now. It's this side's growing. Noel, you're negotiating that. It's something that's always going to be there. But how easy that metaphor crosses over. I don't think we've had that in a podcast up until, any kind of comments where, very often it's about escaping work or negotiating work or recuperating from work. And I'm sure there's an element of all of that and there has been an element of that, but it's more than that. This it's an alternative ethic for me. And I think it's something that perhaps the rest of us could learn from, in terms of, the orientation we have towards work, the orientation we have towards leisure. It's not an either or. It doesn't have to be. It's not you're not doing this or that. It's actually what can you do, and what can one give the other. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful example. Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you, Sam. And it's interesting for me because I think at our very first episode 2, at our episode 2 of our season 1, I talked about how I was trying to keep my hobby and my work very separate. And since then, I've been on a journey of bringing it together. And it's been an interesting one to observe about the kind of identity morphing and the links, and then actually drawing parallels more explicitly that you wouldn't have drawn otherwise. Fascinating.
Tim, would you like to quickly tell us a bit about what you're going to play, and then let's hear some.
Okay, this is old Robert Johnson song that was done by Elmore James with the slide. I've got the slide here on my finger, or bottleneck, as it is called. Dust My Broom. Get up in the morning, believe I will dust my broom. Get up in the morning, believe I will dust my broom. Gotta leave my baby, my friends can't have my room. Thank you.
It's fantastic, Tim. Thank you. Love Robert Johnson. Love Robert Johnson. So, Noel, would you like to tell us a little bit about what you're going to play? I imagine you might show us some improvisation or play something more specific. Tell us a bit about what we're going to hear just now.
So I think I'll just play a little bit of a standard, There Is No Greater Love, and just do a little bit of improvisation for you, if that's okay.
Sounds like perfection. Thank you. As a fellow brass player, Noel, I have got top quality admiration for that. I love the beautiful soft tone you were talking about that you've been cultivating.
Thank you.
Just
Very kind.
absolute heaven to listen to that. Thank you.
If you're ever coming down to Bristol to play, please let us know.
You could get me a gig there. I'd love to come and do a gig in Bristol.
That would be amazing.
Super. Great. Thank you, everyone. This has been a great conversation. We may well come to a part 2 at some stage. I think it would be good to unpack some of this learning further. Thank you to our guests, Noel Dennis and Tim Hughes, and our regular contributors, Kat Branch and Sam Elkington, for a fascinating conversation. Thank you to our wider podcast team, Julia Denman and Helga Gannerstad-Ditter. And goodbye, everyone. Until next time, when we continue to talk about leisure, work and well-being, and what we can all do to engage with leisure seriously. Goodbye.